Welcome to today's KM World webinar, brought to you by Grid Dynamics and Data IQ. I'm Mary D. Ojala, Editor-in-Chief of KM World magazine. I will be the moderator for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Unlocking the Power of Data-Driven Strategies, a GenAI Journey. Now, before we get started, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a Q&A session, so if you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been selected during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Plus, all viewers will be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for viewing today's webinar. And as you can see, our agenda today, we start with introductions, panelist intros, the panel discussion, and the Q&A. And now, to introduce our speakers for today, Pat Converse, Global Partnership Director, Grid Dynamics, Connor Jensen, Field CDO, Data IQ, Sneha Narahali, Head of Product and UX, Sephora. And we are going to start with our first topic, which Pat will introduce.
Thanks. The importance of data in today's world is changing pretty dramatically. And Connor, I think, Data IQ is in a unique situation to, help with those changes and help companies adapt to that. Do you want to talk a little bit more in this space around what the significance of those changes are?
Yeah, it's an interesting, the sort of rise in importance of data and analytics has certainly been a long time coming and moving over time. But, this last year now, especially with the explosion of interest in generative AI, is just, I don't know that's necessarily like a new lens on it, but it's just pushing a little bit, harder into this space. And I think what's really sort of like an interesting angle here is that it's not just the data, right? It's the application of data. And we've been talking about it for a long time of sort of like, there's all this stuff. But big data was the, big thing 12, 15 years ago. And data was the new oil. And there's like all these, sort of, we keep saying it over and over again. And I don't think that the changes are really manifesting themselves in like commercial strategies and in how organizations react to it. And where I think people are really starting to realize, or maybe I'm a little optimistic here, but certainly like we're getting sort of like hit in the face again and again and again with how important having a good data strategy is, how important data is to a company in sort of enabling all the facets of what that company wants to do. And the generative AI one, I think, is now just like one more sort of like wave pushing that forward, because now it's access to new types or a usefulness of new types of data that have been unlocked within companies. And, all of the excitement about it, I think, is very much similar to the excitement we've seen around sort of data science and machine learning and AI repeatedly now over the last sort of couple of decades. And every time it kind of comes back to the importance of like, oh, but your data is still at the heart of all of this. And so, we're really seeing that there's a difference in how companies will perform commercially in the market, and that like having an effective data strategy, effectively using analytics, effectively using AI really can set companies up to be a differentiated player in their markets. And we're really now starting to see the commercial impacts of that.
Yeah, we really are. Sneha, we talked about data as the new currency kind of being a troped phrase over the past several years. Talk a little bit about how generative AI is going to change that, kind of enhance that and change that story. Why is it different this time?
I would say, Pat, I don't think data is the new currency. I think data has always been a currency right from the beginning. However, the value of this currency, I think, is changing. And the more and it increases based on the maturity of how organizations choose to use this data and how important the data collection and the application is. Now, I think generating insights and unlocking customer experiences that didn't exist before is what Gen AI is accelerating. And this is what is increasing the value of this currency. And apart from unlocking these new experiences, getting more data from these experiences, so it's like a well oiled machine that companies are trying to achieve, is what's making this, unlike superpowers that companies need to focus on.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. I talk internally with our generative AI practice at Grid Dynamics, and one of the observations they had, around, data and data as a currency is that, they see the value of unstructured data within the organization. I'm not talking about like traditional unstructured data, but kind of the untraditional unstructured data that a lot of people don't deal with, documents, large sets of text data, images, etc., now have a kind of new value that, it was very difficult to grab a hold of in the past. And large language models are going to make those very valuable. And in the, if you think about the tech market itself, there's a place called Hugging Face, I think is the name of the data set store that's out on the web now. And you have all of these kind of, unstructured data sets that are now available, that have tons of document data, tons of image data, that are specifically curated for specific kind of workloads within generative AI that you never really saw before. So it's not, they were kind of telling me it's not that it's the new currency, it's that the currency got a new denomination.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that, moving on to our next topic, the role that generative AI is going to play in data strategies is pretty unique. If you look at kind of the architectural diagram up there, you see kind of a lot of the same things that you would have seen in the past, just with different names. You've got data ingestion, you have chunking, then there's this new concept of vectorization of the data that you're bringing in, but then you get right into, applying it to models that this time are kind of, out there on their own. And now you apply this vectorized data as context to them, and then, go through and kind of generate, that response out of that model that way. And that really changes, in my opinion, how some of the, the inner workings of our data strategy has to be to really create value on these. And let me flip over one slide. And for people who aren't super familiar with AI, if you think about the early phases of AI and ML, really coming out of mathematics, traditional machine learning in the 1940s, we're using a mathematical algorithm to make a prediction or, go through and kind of see a pattern. And then you get the predictive foundational models that really took, flight in 2014, and you were able to kind of industrialize those and do those at scale. And those were all really based off kind of, there were some language, applications for it, but most of them were focused around predictive AI and, predicting, what would my inventory needs be? What would the best price be based on some kind of historical data and training them that way? Whereas with generative AI, we're kind of taking that to a next level, in my opinion, and that's going to change the data strategy for an organization, where you're going from just focusing on data quantity, data quality, kind of the nitpicks and very structured kind of data sets that you deal with, and moving to valuing these unstructured data sets and moving your data strategy from how do I take unstructured data, create feature stores and things like that go into normal predictive algorithms, now to how do I chunk that data? How do I vectorize it? What's the right model for vectorizing it? Where do I store that in a vector store that's appropriate? What's the right generative AI model to use this data against this context and then create outcomes? It's really going to change the pipeline, I think, pretty dramatically. And some of that data is pretty delicate data. Some of it's personal data, some of it's financial data. And those are complications that a lot of companies haven't thought about yet as they're kind of putting their toe in the water with LLMs, so to speak. Let's see. Yeah, I think I hit most of that. And then, we got a whole bunch of new applications. And Sneha, you're experiencing that day to day in what you're doing at Sephora. I'd love to hear some more about that.
Sure. I think overall in the industry, and not just in Sephora, there are two main themes that we're seeing in how Gen AI is helping, like the application of Gen AI is helping organizations. One is empowering employees to do more. And then the second thing is unlocking client experiences. So when you talk about empowering employees to do more, it's basically accelerating productivity, effectiveness, driving innovation in the day-to-day things that we do so that people can focus on doing more strategic stuff. And then you have the whole client experience, which irrespective of which industry you're in, whether it's customer service or shopping assistant, conversational commerce, I think it's just blowing up the potential that we could use Gen AI with. So as you can see on the slide, I think this is a very, a starting point of all the applications that we can potentially see. It's not limited to just customer experience. There's process automation that we're talking about. Content creation, I think, is coming up pretty well in terms of how we can do generate contents that consistent. But I think the underlying factor for all of these is one that we need to make sure that in the midst of all of this, we are not losing sight of, for example, like Sephora's flair, like what does Sephora's values are, so that we are not making it completely AI driven. And then the second thing is, of course, how do we use it responsibly? And we are understanding the nuances that the application of Gen AI brings. And we're able to balance coming across with these new ideas, but also looking at we're not breaking any standards and rules, and we're looking at it from an ethical way as well.
Yeah. Connor?
I'd love, I think an important note that you sort of said there, Sneha, is around that it's how are you thinking about using this in the context of who Sephora is as a brand, right? And I think that that's one of the things that is an important thing for companies to really, or organizations more broadly, to think about as they're starting to pursue Gen AI and thinking about it, is that we need to keep in mind that it's still a technology and it's still a tool that can help a company be better at what it already is, right? And I think that that's one of the things that sometimes, and obviously I come from the data science world and I've worked for sort of data and analytics driven companies, and sometimes there feels like a little bit of a rush to now say, oh, well, everybody now has to be sort of a data driven company or an AI driven company or things like that. And I don't necessarily think that's true. Like every company has to sort of be best at what it's best at, but AI is a tool and a technology that can help it do that. And so if you look at a company like Sephora who's focused on sort of lifestyle and luxury and certain aspects, or you look at a fashion company, or you look at a manufacturing company that is focused on sort of like lean processes and just in time manufacturing, and that's what they're best at or whatever. We need to be thinking about these applications of Gen AI and how does it help us do what we're already focused on, right? And so it's one thing that I would sort of even challenge a little bit, sort of where you're talking about, before there, Pat, around that Gen AI is should be changing our data strategies and things like that. It still should always be coming from what is our focus as a company, right? Like what is our strategy right now? Not our data strategy, not our analytics strategy, but what is our what is our core business strategy? What are the things that we as an organization are trying to achieve over the next, whatever that time horizon is, 3 to 5 years or whatever? Are we launching a new segment and, we are doing market research and product development and all that? How do we use GenAI? Is it content creation? Is it better segmentation? Is it, better interpretation of feedback from processes? Or are we trying to improve costs somewhere? And then how are we using GenAI to, help improve call center efficiencies or something like that? But we need to be, I think that this is where we sometimes lose track of like who we are as a company when a new technology comes out, and there's a little bit of like a rush to go and adopt this new technology, and it kind of becomes the stand. You hear this especially in like the tech industry of sort of like a solution in search of a problem, and I think that that's a really dangerous thing for companies to fall into with generative AI. And I've seen this, sort of other data science and AI technologies over the last 10, 15 years, where rather than saying, okay, here's our like 5 strategic pillars for the next few years, and this is what we're working on, and this is where AI fits in and helps us to enable all those things. That's where I think GenAI, we need to be really careful about helping executives and leaders understand how to diagnose a problem or diagnose an opportunity, right? It could be a growth opportunity or it could be a problem we're trying to solve, and then work with their AI leaders to then now say, what are the potential analytics or AI applications that can help us solve this? And I think that this is especially important with the current, especially the sort of the big push that's coming into C-suites and from C-suites around GenAI itself, and sort of saying like, hey, there's a whole spectrum of analytics that you can bring to solve a problem. And GenAI is now an application that can help us solve new problems that we couldn't do before. But we shouldn't throw out everything that we've always done in the past, all the classic ML that, was on that last slide. That should still probably be the answer to 80% of the problems that you're trying to solve. GenAI, didn't throw everything that we've ever done from a data science perspective out the window, but it has now unlocked new things that we can be doing. And so like some of these game-changing applications, we need to be focusing on the really good applications for GenAI. And then again, not going and chasing that because it's the fun new thing that's out there. We should be focusing at it from the perspective of saying, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Now, where can GenAI help us do that?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we see, in some of our customers where they're getting pressure from senior executive leadership. It's like, oh, go and find, we need something in a press release. We've got to go and have something. And, they're going around and asking, give me 100 use cases and we'll try and figure out what's going to create value, rather than trying to start from the value that needs to be created and then seeing it as, a tool to bring to bear. I don't know if anybody will notice it, but I left out Knowledge Assistant in this slide because it is the most mundane of the use cases and the most kind of obvious one that GenAI really enables. And our internal team has kind of got it in their head that this whole technology stack is going to enable us over the next 5 to 10 years to help businesses and their employees kind of go from, process-based, task-based working into a world of having a set of tools that will allow them to work at the kind of creative synthesis level, where they can bring together content created automatically from here, insights generated from there, and really kind of change the way we work, beyond just, these kind of individual use cases that we hit on right here. And one thing I did want to call out while we're here on this particular slide is we saw it with the different architectural model, in the previous slides. The operationalizing this, the LLM ops, is going to be dramatically different from kind of traditional AI and ML ops in terms of the different tech stacks that you have to hit. There's similarities, but there are also kind of dramatic differences. Connor, I know we're going to hit on some of that a little bit later, but I just wanted to kind of call that out here. And really having the right tooling and the right governance is going to allow companies to do it safely.
Yeah, I'd say, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about the sort of like the architecture and the scaling challenges, I think one of the things I'm curious to see what happens from this sort of as LLM ops becomes, or if it even should become a thing, which I'm not entirely sold on, because one of the things that I think ML ops as sort of a buzzword in an area that people have been working on for the last few years has focused a lot on the technology components of it, right? Like, how do I productionalize this model that's going to be hit some super high volume with low latency and it's customer facing and this and that, and like, HA and horizontal scaling and all these different sort of like technological solves, which are hard problems to solve, to be fair, but it's really around that sort of like the 1% of the 1% of use cases where you're actually challenging a model with that sort of volume, right? Like so many things that we run, even when, people say, oh, we want to do something real time. It's like, okay, what does real time mean? Right. Like, and that's even, the number of real time applications that I've seen built in my career versus the number of times people have said we need something that's real time is, maybe like probabilistically indistinguishable from zero, right? Like most real time applications aren't real time and very few of them are. And so ML ops is like really, it's been this sort of like very tech centric focus on like things that really are, and I'm not trivializing how hard it is to do like the big ML things at scale, but 99% of the things that you're using data science and analytics for at a company don't actually require that sort of technology and that challenge. But what ML ops often has sort of left out is the process challenges in doing that. And I think that when you think about the process of sort of like building and even sort of start like identifying a model and cleaning your data and building the model and then sort of iterating on that and pushing it to production, we haven't yet sort of, I think, landed at what I sort of often think of as like the data science version of the SDLC, right? Like we're not there yet. Like we don't have, there's agile and there's Kanban and there's waterfall and there's all these things that have come out of software and hardware manufacturing that have applications in data science, but it's like we haven't quite sort of landed on what that real thing of, what to me ML ops should be, of sort of like an actual, here's the process by which you do it, and here's the technology, and here's how you line these things all up. And to me, the process part of LLM ops is going to be, 80 to 90% the same. Identify your problem, identify the potential data that you have to do it, find which model solves the best, iterate on the best solution, and then push it out into the hands of your end users. And like that tail end where there is a distinction between sort of maybe what we call ML ops today from I have a model and I'm trying to push it out to an end user. And then I'm now doing this with an LLM instead of, XGBoost or some sort of other sort of classic ML model. There are technological differences that are going to happen there, but like we shouldn't, again, throw out everything that we already do around sort of like identifying and managing this whole process. But there are new technological considerations there, and we'll definitely touch on some of those. But it's like I get my hackles up at the term LLM ops a little bit because I'm like, we haven't even come close to solving ML ops, and like I think it's 99% the same ML ops and LLM ops. We just have to swap out a few boxes in what it takes to go to production. But that's maybe a little bit of my soapbox, so I'll step down.
That's definitely a fair soapbox. I would, when I look at it, I kind of see the same stages, but I think just the names and the technologies are slightly different. If you think about data prep coming in, I always think of that as being analogous to, what is my chunking algorithm? What is my vectorization? You're doing data prep, right? And then you're going to do something with that data later on, and you move it to the next stage in that pipeline. So that, I know exactly where you're going with that.
It's different nuances, but again, like to me, even if I think about like data prep and data staging for a classification algorithm is different than it is for, like a predictive algorithm, right? Like there's already differences, like data prep and like what I need in terms of building something out to do a classification problem is already different than regression, but we call it the same thing. And I think that, the same idea will apply in these generative use cases. And I've even had somebody who was talking about this at one point, and a prospect or a customer sort of said, oh, well, I thought one of the cool things about GenAI was that we no longer had to do data prep. I sort of like fell off my chair, right? I was like, okay. You no longer have to build it into a data warehouse. This is true. But, in the same way that when we think about if you're trying to improve your model performance of, some standard sort of predictive algorithm today, the vast majority of gains come from improving your data cleansing, data structuring, like feature engineering, all of that sort of stuff. It's different words, it's chunking and embeddings, and it's, building a vector store, it's doing all that. And it's like, but it's still that same umbrella of I'm preparing my data to feed to the model. And then once I fed it to the model, I'm going back and improving my data to improve the results on the model. And I think some of the nuance and like here, and I've, that was maybe the most stark way I've heard it was that conversation. But I think people are already starting to like be like, oh, well, now I no longer have to clean my data, or I no longer have to do data prep, and I just throw it all into an LLM, and then like magic happens. And I'm like, all right, I've heard this story for a long time, and we're not there yet, and I don't think we ever will be.
No, I don't think so either.
Also, communicating is key, right? Like Connor, going back to your original thing of, is everything a Gen AI problem now? Or like asking the right questions, especially at a leadership level. I think that thought process of nailing it down to like, this is what is truly a Gen AI problem. And then the other thing, I think that hearing you speak, like the foundation of how we start to actually solve for it, there's a lot of steps before, which I think is common irrespective of whether it's a Gen AI opportunity or not. And I think being on the product and the business side, educating and communicating this with all the stakeholders in the organization is pretty critical, and getting them along the journey of how this even comes to life, I think will go a long way right from the beginning as well.
And you brought up a really interesting point about, classification models, and then, kind of traditional AI versus kind of generative AI. And one of the more interesting things that we see in some of our retail customers is this idea of doing kind of automatic product attribution in their shopping systems, where you can just kind of take in an image of a product, from that generate a set of classifications right from it. So you're doing classification of an image, taking that as input, and then having the context of that brand's style, that brand's market, those bits and pieces of marketing information that you need to create the content to do the attribution to go into your store automatically, where you're kind of bringing that traditional AI as being part of the solution, and then enhancing the productivity of it with a generative AI piece at the end. I just think the kind of combinations there are going to be infinitely productive for people. And taking some of these use cases that we have here and mixing and matching them with traditional AI use cases will also generate a huge amount of opportunity.
I think that's a huge one, that sort of like taking the good data we've already built, taking the good models that we've already built, and layering generative AI, like the AI agents and these different ideas that will make it easier for people to interact with, honestly, a data warehouse or other structured data, or the outcome of a prediction that, goes beyond just, here's your variable importance or something like that, but like actually like the AI agent's ability to help somebody use what we've already built without having, saying, oh, we'll go learn to be a data scientist and then you can work with these models, right? I think there's tons of opportunity there, and I'm excited about that for sure.
Awesome. So Sneha, I know, you work at Sephora, and, in kind of the, retail industry, gamification is, a big deal in loyalty programs and, how you view customers and customer interactions. I personally don't work in that space very much. I'm normally in manufacturing. I would love for you to make me smart on gamification and its impacts on Gen AI, or Gen AI's rather impacts on gamification strategies.
Sure. So as you know, Pat, like again, gamification, personalization, all of these strategies have existed from a long time ago. What has changed is the definition and the application of how we actually bring this to life. Recently, we launched a gamified experience of the Beauty Insider loyalty program with certain challenges that we are asking our insiders to actually accomplish. So we're kind of bringing in an experiential gamified experience through our challenges that we've launched. Similarly, with personalization, I think there different companies have different level of maturity. Beginning with what was personalizing an email back in the days. Now you have personalized experiences, like your whole homepage can be personalized, and I think that's just growing in scale. Now, what GenAI can actually help unlock is being able to do all of these at scale with efficiencies, and also the ability to test more so that we can drive value faster with more nuanced testing that we would probably not be able to do before. Now, if you look at what GenAI can do, whether it's content creation, research and insights, consistent campaign creation, hyper personalized messaging, real time communication, I think all of these play into the role of how they improve the gamification experience as well as the personalized experience. Just looking at a little bit into the personalized journey itself, and you take every aspect of the foundation of how a personalized experience is unlocked, GenAI can play a role in it. So, for example, if you're looking at content creation, you can provide recommendations on the images and description based on the team needs, on the current trends. It can automate manual tasks like tagging, freeing up the people to do more compelling things, as well as enhancing the existing content and creating personalized visuals. But again, it's not to replace human creativity, but rather to serve it as a powerful tool to empower marketers. With this, keeping this in mind, I think there's a long way to go for all the companies to understand how GenAI can help serve and augment the experiences that are there. And personalization and gamifications are just two examples of it. I think there are many, many more that we can leverage to make this more meaningful to our customers.
And that's pretty impressive on like how that will be able to impact that whole broad spectrum. I know internally for us, we have some offerings in the customer 360 space, and we've been cranking through, trying how to improve that offering that we have today with generative AI capabilities, and how to help bring that to customers. Connor, what's Data IQ doing in this space?
So what's exciting to me is like hearing, obviously Sephora uses our platform, and like one of the beautiful things about Data IQ is we provide a general purpose platform, and so we sort of provide the ability for companies to use the latest and greatest technology to solve these things. The downside of that is that like I'm rarely really even in the weeds on the cool things that companies are doing with this, and so it's always exciting to sort of hear that. The one thing that I do think is and thinking about what Sneha was just talking about there, one of the things that I think is cool is we're seeing companies doing some of the same sort of tailored experience when they're thinking about like HR and onboarding and things like that. And so that's when you think about that sort of the experience of onboarding to a new company, it's a critical time for a new employee. It is typically very difficult to do. It's difficult to do at scale. You think about every person who walks in the door to work with you has a different starting point, right? You have not even just in people in different departments. Obviously, if I hire a salesperson versus a data scientist, they have very different starting points, but even two salespeople have very different starting points, and so do two different data scientists. And I'm starting to see applications where people are taking some of these newer technologies and actually starting to personalize onboarding experiences in the same way that Sneha was talking about that in terms of personalizing customer experiences. And I think that's where that's a really cool like application of some of this to have that sort of, how do you understand where somebody is and meet them where they are. And I even love and nobody haven't seen him doing it yet, but hearing people even talking out to like performance management and performance reviews and things like that, and like actually starting to make those more meaningful experiences. And in a day and era where employee engagement is often not where companies would like it to be, for various reasons, actually leveraging these technologies to make a better experience, not just for your customers like Sephora is doing, but making it a better experience for your employees, I think are cool. But I think we're seeing a lot of different prototypes and applications for some of these, these generative AI tools. None of them, or I'd say few of them yet, have really sort of are in full production and really being used in anger by companies. I think there's still a lot of work to happen there. I think the first starting point is some of what you were talking about before, sort of what will probably be the sort of like knowledge assistant type stuff of, I think that's an easy starting point for most companies because they don't yet know the right applications for the tools. And so just helping your employees do their jobs better is a good start to it. But I want to start to see one example that we did do with the customers. We're actually working with a tech company on their support team and how they would react to a customer when they would send in a request for support. It's like a hardware tech company, and built with them a recommendation engine. But instead of it being the knowledge assistant of I want to be able to query and look for whatever documents come up to help me troubleshoot this ticket, was actually when the ticket would come up, it would come up with the suggested list of here's the resources that you can use to answer the question, and here's based on historical tickets that were similar to this what that answer could look like, right? And so this is I think that the piece that we haven't even start to see yet. I was talking with someone on my team earlier last week or the week before, and we were sort of trying to think of sometimes data and this is thought of as the fourth industrial revolution, right? And you start to think about like the changes to entire systems that were driven by technologies enabled by the waves of sort of the systems. And that's, we were actually both, neither of us could really think of like a truly sort of like AI driven system. And I think about little things like that of, it's not, how do I make it easier for somebody to go and, find knowledge, but how do I actually push the knowledge to a person with, knowing what they're going to need? How do you start to do those things? I'm getting little glimpses of it there, but I think there's like still so much opportunity that we're not even close to seeing what the real cool applications are out there.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things that I've seen internally that related to gamification was really around kind of building how to kind of dynamically build guardrails and give feedback into the system that we were creating, leveraging generative AI, and how do you kind of incentivize? This was in a legal context. So how do you incentivize people to give the feedback that you kind of need to make their system better and better? And so, not just from like a use in industry, there's also a gamification aspect of, how do we help get feedback from our own customers about the internal products that we've built for them to make these systems better? And that's going to be a dynamic that we've got to figure out too, in this kind of industrial revolution that, nobody really cared whether or not the steam engine rolled fast enough. There were safety concerns, but, nobody's going to say, I don't want to use it because it's loud and noisy or whatever. But some people kind of don't like to use internal systems for whatever reason, and creating gamification models that incentivize them, either at the monetary level or at the psychological level to use the system, I think is pretty interesting and kind of a new area that we have to kind of explore, with generative AI.
The other thing that I would say is like one of the things that I think we still are struggling with in the sort of data science AI space is the user interface side of things, right? It's actually something where, really over the last maybe like 3 to 4 years, as I run data science teams, I've actually started hiring specifically for data scientists or sort of like fledgling data scientists who have a UI UX background, because like we build these amazing models, and then the end user gets a new CSV in their email box. And like, they're like, what changed? And we're like, the math is better. And they're like, but it's still the same shitty CSV that I got last week, right? Like we lose so much in the delivery. And there's so few data scientists because it's like we expect so much of data scientists. There's like so many skills that we expect data scientists to have, from the computer and the domain knowledge and the math and the statistics and all these different things. And it's like, UIs and UXs is an entirely separate domain that, like, most data scientists have no exposure to whatsoever. And, I've seen where when you build a really good interface that helps somebody intuit and understand and work with the output of whatever that model is, the adoption and the success of that model is so much higher. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's a no-brainer, but it's hard to do, right? Because it's like we have so many things that we're already trying to work on with this. And I think that that's another aspect of this sort of gamification and the personalization is just getting better, period, at like helping to expose the richness and the goodness of the things that we build. And so like the AI agents and other things that we sort of already touched on, like that's where I think that there is an opportunity for, this gamification, this personalization, into just helping people work with the outputs of whatever we create that much better. And then assuming that as that ticks up, that people will then be successful with that.
I cannot agree more with you, Connor. I think that's one, being able to have the change management in place while we are implementing these new technologies, and how from a business user or whoever is using it, they're able to play around with it so that they know how the outcome is being generated. And I think the second bit is also explainability of what changes from a technical perspective is able to drive changes from an experience standpoint. That explainability, I think, is very key, because to your point, like there's so much going on in the back end, but being able to explain that hours of work that we did in the back end in changing the model is going to drive this exact change in the front end, I think is super critical and kind of underrated, to be honest.
Yeah, we could talk a lot on that one, because there's a lot of context in that space around UI and how important it is, and how so many customers of ours on the services side, they don't want to spend money on it, but it's an area that creates the most value for them because it drives usage. We probably need to move on to something a little bit more tangible, because I keep getting this ping that we have a time limit, which I don't like, but I know we have one. So one of the things that Data IQ and Grid Dynamics have done together is work pretty tightly around a starter kit for something a little bit more classic in the AI and ML space around inventory optimization. And there's a promise here for really big gains. We're moving into a pretty unique time in history where supply chains are shortening. There's demographic challenges all around the world. Low-cost labor centers are, they're aging out in terms of their population, so they can't support the manufacturing. And at the same time, we have this desire for personalization en masse. And that really drives some unique problems in supply chain and inventory optimization. And I just want to hit on some of the goodness that we've created together in that space. Connor, I'm going to move on to the next or the second. Probably this slide would probably be the best one to move on to then.
Yeah, no, and we don't need to spend a ton of time here, but I think that the thing that I want to highlight here that's exciting is, I mentioned before, so Data IQ is a general purpose platform. It allows, regardless of your industry, regardless of the domain that you work in an industry, and honestly, even regardless of sort of your existing skill level and getting into it, you don't have to be a data scientist to use it. You don't have to have the super, sort of advanced AI engineers, et cetera. Our whole mission has always been to sort of lower the barrier to entry, make it that much easier for any company to embark on this journey of being sort of data and AI driven. But what that really comes to, especially for companies who are like really starting out, or companies, or not even necessarily companies, because even within any company, there are different levels of maturity, but a function or a company that's newer to AI, the ability for them to get moving quickly is a struggle. And it's one of the things that I love looking at is sort of like our solutions or our partners or people who are helping, who actually bring the technical expertise in a specific area. So like the inventory allocation, where we're able to help a company move faster through doing it. And we have this library that we've built with partners like Grid Dynamics. This one is a great example of it, where it's, retail companies, CPG companies, inventory optimization is always an area of opportunity, right? Like there's very few companies have really solved this, and then you acquire something new or you come out with a new product and you have to do it all over again, right? So it's a constantly changing thing. But it also gives these frameworks where now we're also building GenAI into all of these existing pieces, so that then you're getting that off the shelf. And so, all these solutions and all these things like this one, it's something that can help a company move faster, but we're always updating it and improving it as we move forward. And so, this one is a great example of it. And I won't, people can read the slide, or they can go to either the Dynamics website or the Dataiku website to read more about this one in specific. But, it's just something that I want to hit on is like, we have to be looking for these opportunities as organizations to just move faster. And, this is one of my favorite examples of one where, it's very slick. It's a great model, and it really can help a company who's getting, into solving this problem with AI. Again, if you're a retail company or you're a CPG company and you're looking at those strategic pillars, and managing inventory better is, one of those things that you're focusing on, how do you get moving that much faster? These are great examples of that.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about this is because of the platform that Dataiku has. This is so automated and so slick and so smooth that the fast changing problems that you may have in a supply chain, they can be resolved fairly quickly, and you can move on to the next best model, very, very quickly without a lot of disruption to the business. Whereas, in traditional kind of AI-driven platforms that are supply chain related, sometimes that can be very difficult. So I really love this solution.
Totally agree.
Let me see if this flips the way I want it to. 1, 2, there we go. So I kind of hinted at this earlier around governance, risk, and ethical concerns. And, Connor, take it away. This is an area that you have a lot of experience dealing with.
It's a huge opportunity for the industry at scale. And, building on what we've talked about a lot before, it's not a new problem, but it is a new dimension to an existing problem that is a little bit of a phase shift in some of the complexity of the problems, right? When we think about, we work in regulated industries very commonly. I come from finance, prior to moving over to tech. There's some areas where we have a lot of rules in place, whether we're thinking about something like the California Data Protection Act or we're thinking about GDPR, there are in some areas globally regulations that, govern how we can use our customers' data or personal data. Then certainly when you work in finance or you work in pharma or healthcare, then they are even more rules around sort of like how identifying how you apply it and this and that. And it's a little bit of a moving target, right? The laws will continue to change and the technology continues to change, and it's a struggle for being able to do it. But, when we look at things like the IP attribution, even just going back to the ideas of using open source software, period, right? All these LLMs are still fundamentally built on open source software. They've got different components in that, where even just the legality of using open source software is already a little bit tricky to do. But now, how do you attribute IP to an AI, right? Like who developed that IP? Is it the data scientist who coded up that particular use case? Is it data scientists or the company who developed the LLM that's at the core of what you're building? And then, of course, you have to think about the liability side of things, right? So like, how do you indemnify companies against the use of LLMs and all these different things where you don't know what's going on? It's one thing when we think about, the sort of more like transparent or white box type models where I can say, okay, this data went in and know the literal math that's happening. And then like this answer came out and we can track and understand every feature that went in and how it influenced and things like that. But when you start talking about these new models that have, 300 billion parameters, that's impossible, right? just purely impossible. And there are some techniques that you can do in the sort of neural net space to have a look at a little bit of the input and output, but then now on the generative side, it gets that much more complicated. And so like they're not new problems. So some of the things we've been talking about already, but like they're just getting more and more complicated as we look at the complexity of the models and the scale of the data and all of that. And I'm just sort of like scratching the surface of some of these challenges here. But, for any organization thinking about generative AI and how to apply it, like there are a lot of considerations that we need to be very, very mindful of and get out ahead of. And I've heard a number of people that have talked about, like we don't yet know where it's going to go on the regulatory side, and like what will happen. We've seen the new AI Act in the EU come. There's certainly like legislation and discussion about it in the United States. Companies need to be prepared to be proactive about how are we using our data and building our data pipelines? How are we choosing the models that we're doing? How do we know who's worked on it? How do we know who's touched it? Have we documented things? Have like all of these things that we know we're supposed to do, right? I don't think that any of this is necessarily like, I had no idea that I should document my code or document the data sources or, anything like that. Like we know these things, but we are always moving fast. There's a lot of things to do. It's easy to let some of that stuff slip through the cracks. The flip side of it is then just, the challenge of not getting bogged down by the processes and the regulations and the stuff like that, where like you end up inhibiting a company's ability to be successful. And so it's a delicate balance, and there's a lot more unknowns than knowns, I think, right now.
Gotcha. And I know there's some great stuff that, Dataiku can bring to kind of support that. Is there anything on this slide that you wanted to talk to? I think you might have hit some of the areas, but maybe not all of them.
The only thing that I'll say on this, and then of course I'm always happy to answer, questions about it, is one of the biggest challenges right now with the LLMs is, there's this obvious huge proliferation of LLMs. We're very much in sort of divergence phase of this, where there's tons of LLMs. There's commercial ones, there's the local and open source ones, and everything in between. And right now, a lot of what you do with an LLM is sort of wrapped up in whoever your service provider is and what capabilities they provide for you to use with that. And it's a little bit of sort of like that, like almost like, old school, like vertical architecture stacks of like, I picked to use this technology. So now it's the hardware and it's the software and it's all the, database and everything was sort of like all in one. LLMs are a little bit in that stage right now. And that's where we're at Dataiku, we're sort of trying to break that apart to say, hey, the LLM, the algorithm itself in the middle should be completely independent of all these different pieces you put around it. PII identification, content moderation, cost effectiveness, all these different things need to be independent. And so we're trying to really build that as sort of something where companies can build the right processes, build the right pieces, independent of which LLM using, which provider they're using, to really help to sort of future-proof that architecture and make it able for them to use the right piece at the right time for the right data without too much restriction or too much sort of like switching costs and penalty for saying like, we went all in on this particular LLM provider, and then a year later, for whatever reason, we've decided to move off, and now we have to rebuild everything from scratch. We're trying to prevent companies from having to do that. So that's the LLM mush in a nutshell, as fast as I could say it.
Well, the mesh is pretty impressive in terms of like some of the problems that it's helping us speak to and solve with our customers. So, we're really impressed by it at Grid.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I think we can move on to the QA session. Mary, if you want to take it back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That was a fascinating discussion, and clearly you could go on for hour after hour after hour, but we're not. We're going to take some questions from our viewers. Let me start with this one. Could you provide more information on the Dataiku and Grid Data Starter Kit and how it can be implemented to streamline operations and optimize inventory management?
You mean you want to take that, Pat? Or you want me to?
Probably the best way to deal with that is to grab a hold of myself or Connor after this, and we can walk through a lot of that. It's an offering within the marketplace at Dataiku, and we're happy to work with you all on that.
Perfect. All righty. Here's another one. What are some practical steps that data enthusiasts and analysts can take to stay updated and leverage GenAI in their work? I would say staying updated is a major challenge.
Staying updated is a major challenge. What I'll say from my vantage point is very much the most important part is to just start doing it and trying it and see and like build your own sort of set of understanding of where it is. And so, for me, there's no substitution for actually sort of the struggle. And so whether it's just leveraging, assuming your company allows it, something like the Chat GPT or some of the off the shelf ones, but whatever your company allows for you to do, go in and use it, ask those questions, do it, start to find the limitations, right? Like find what works, find what doesn't. Like there's no substitute for that sort of like hands-on understanding, but also be proactive and volunteer like at your company. Every company I have talked to this year, I've had a conversation around GenAI. It is a massive topic right now. Everybody's talking about it. And every company out there has some sort of, some sort of initiative, some sort of pilot, something like that. Like go ask, volunteer, talk to your manager, go find where that's happening. Because I think the scale of opportunities, and I like that was literally my start into data science 12 or so years ago, was working in a company where we had scoped out and we're going to do an investment in data science. And I was tangentially, part of the project that did it and have an analytics and a math background and got asked to sort of go help out in there and, set forth like the last decade of my career now, just by being in the right place in the right time. But the only way that you're going to be there is by talking to your manager, talking to people, asking about it, and like put your hand up and just raise your hand to be part of a pilot or part of, an exploratory committee or things like that. Like there's no substitute for the hands-on experience.
Yeah.
I would just add that apart from just looking at individual use cases, think about how would you use this at scale, right? Like whether you're building the governance models or the structure, or you're setting up the organization to like actually do this at scale. It's important to start thinking about it right from the beginning so that once it's successful and you proved out that this is the way to go, you're not then reactive to say, okay, now what? Like, how do we now scale it? It's a more proactive approach as well.
Agreed.
What are the challenges and risks with leveraging proprietary data with these publicly available LLM models? Pat, maybe you want to take that one.
They are myriad, and they're kind of changing all the time as legislation changes. Fortunately, we do a lot of work in heavily regulated industries, and so we kind of know where the pain points are, where some of the legislation is going, how to solve for those problems, how to protect proprietary data. And also deal with kind of the attribution and some of the sourcing challenges that Connor was mentioning earlier. We've had some interesting situations where, a customer pays for a lot of financial analyst data from various sources. And one of the use cases that, came out of, working with that customer was how do we take that and change that data into a graphical format that people can look at and use internally, to try and help plan for the future of the business. And that led to a slew of questions around, does it fit within legal use rights that we have with those analysts? Can we use this? What is the proper scope for it? Since we're using the subscription data, do we need subscriptions for everybody else who's going to use it? We've had to answer a lot of those questions. So, the best thing to do, I think, is to reach out to myself if you've got like some problems in that space, and I can connect you with our practice who really knows kind of the ins and outs of all that.
Perfect. Well, that is all the time we have for questions today. And we apologize that we were unable to get to all of your questions. But as I stated earlier, all questions will be answered via email. And I would like to thank our speakers today, Pat Converse, Global Partnership Director, Grid Dynamics, Connor Jensen, Field CDO, Data IQ, Sneha Narahali, Head of Product and UX, Sephora. If you would like to review this event or share it with a colleague, please use the same URL that you used for today's event, and it will be archived for 90 days. Plus, you will receive an email with the URL to view the webinar once the archive is posted. If you would like a PDF of the deck, go to the handout section once the archive is live. And just for participating in today's event, you could win this $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on October 31st. We will reach out via email if you are selected as this month's winner. Thank you again for joining us.